Hey everyone, and welcome to F4 Obsessed, a deep dive. This is a show we're doing about the new Hana Yori Dango, Boys Over Flowers, which is called F4 Thailand. And me and my friend MC are going to chat about it every week. This first episode, we're going to cover the Hana Yori Dango phenomenon in general, as well as the special that they released before the first episode. And if MC, if you just want to introduce yourself, since this is on my channel, I'll introduce myself in a second.
Oh, yeah. I'm Marie Claire, and I've collaborated with Ty a bunch of times in the past. I'm known for primarily Star Wars analysis and content, but I am obsessed with Asian dramas as well. And we've actually done a podcast previously called Fall for It, all about Asian dramas.
Yeah, and that one was on my channel as well. That was a short-lived podcast because it was a lot to keep up with because I like making videos. So yeah, if you're here, MC and I have been friends for a long time in the fandom world, and obviously have met a couple of times as well. And we love Asian dramas, and we love storytelling, and we love things that are more in like the mythical sphere. We like mythology, and we like how stories, modern day stories and mainstream stories, reflect mythology. So we tend to get into very deep topics and deep conversation when it comes to something seemingly simple. So
yeah, like why would a manga be remade 6 times in official versions and more than that in unofficial versions? Why is a story that so deeply seems to connect with the psychology of its audience, like why this story? What is it about it? Hana Yori Dango is considered to be the cornerstone of Asian media because it is the story of our modern age for many cultures across Asia. And it, China, Taiwan, Korea, Japan have all taken on versions of this, and it's become this iterative, transformative story. And we're obsessed with it because it deserves to be obsessed with it, in a way.
Yeah, it deserves to be obsessed over. It is such a classic storyline, but every single time that it is told, it takes on something new and something more interesting, and it gives it more to kind of pick apart, which is exactly why we're doing this. And we are going to get into all of that.
And like this makes it folklore. I want to be very, very clear. This is a folklore story that transforms with each telling.
Yeah.
And so it's important to pay attention to it because it's saying something about us as humans in how we love a particular type of story. But then, in a world where people are remaking their own stories all the time, this is not that. This is taking a remake, but like adding cultural and new things to it to make it into something transformational. And yeah, that to me is just amazing.
Yeah. When you start getting into it, if you watch more than one version, it instantly becomes like addicting. I think a lot of people watching this one now are familiar with the story and are familiar with the previous versions, and they're kind of doing the same things that we are. And that's why we decided to do this, is like we're willing to kind of pick apart every single detail because it's fun. And anyone that is familiar with more than one version, they know how much fun it is. So I wanted to kind of do, we kind of introduced ourselves, but also kind of talk about like what first drew us to the story, and then what is kind of our favorite version at the moment.
Okay, what initially drew me to the story, this is really interesting. I was a baby K-drama fan. I had just watched my first Asian drama. I don't even remember what it was 100%. And the next thing Netflix introduced to me was Boys Over Flowers, the Korean version. And I watched it, and it is a wild ride, let me tell you. And maybe it's not even like my favorite version. But after that, I was like, wait a second. Actually, maybe the first thing I watched was Mischievous Kiss, which is a Korean, also kind of like this. It's been remade multiple times, but I watched it, and there's a lot of things about it that I'm like, this was such an odd thing. And it's because of sort of the Korean interpretation of the manga. But then I was like, oh, hey, I'll watch the original Japanese version. I'll read the manga. I'll try to understand this. And then the Meteor Garden 2018 Chinese version came out. And to me, that is the penultimate version so far, just because it is it understood the other shows, it made adjustments, it tried to make it sort of more nowadays and recent, because again, some of these versions are closing on 20 years old. The actual story itself is almost 30 years old, so we have to like keep that in mind. In when they do a new version, they have to update it for the current audiences too.
Yeah, absolutely. And since we're already talking about this, I'll go ahead and go to the next slide to show all the previous versions, because some people still might not be familiar with all of them. But my initial introduction into kind of the world of Hana Yori Dango was because MC said, hey Ty, you're getting into Asian dramas, you should check out Meteor Garden, because it was still premiering at that time. Like the episodes were still coming out weekly on Netflix, and it got to the point where I got so obsessed with it as it was airing that I was watching clips that had not been translated yet that were leaking onto Twitter, and I was just obsessed with, I already knew the storyline because I was also simultaneously like reading the manga and like looking up kind of summaries and like, oh my God, who's she going to end up with kind of thing. So I was spoiling myself, but I was also incredibly excited every like week to week just to see how they were going to get there. And that's when I kind of,
it's going to happen. So how do they get there? That's part of the joy of watching this story play out.
Exactly. So those who are not familiar with it, the official versions I have up on the screen here, obviously started with the manga. They did an anime. The kind of the most iconic one, I would say, the one that kicked off how popular this really was and kind of making it a phenomenon, was the Taiwanese version. So much so that the original soundtrack was used and recreated for the 2018 Chinese version. They kept the same songs, which is really cool. It was such a throwback. And then obviously the 2005 version, Japanese version, a lot of people will say this is their favorite or the best critically one. Like a lot of people like this one because, I mean, it is in the original Japanese and the characters are amazing. The actors are amazing. And the main guy from the Arashi Japanese band. There's a whole kind of rabbit hole you can fall into with that.
And there's a lot of shipping discourse around this one too. Like a lot. Like that, like online, it was like the Wild West a little bit with it.
I've seen some of that. Fine. It always blows my mind that there's shipping discourse in Hana Yori Dango circles, but there was shipping discourse with the 2018 version, so it's very weird. And then of course there's the 2009 version, Boys Over Flowers, that is the Korean version, and it kind of went down in K-drama history because it had, I don't want to say this is the only reason, but one of the big reasons is because it had things in it that were just so bad it was good. Like the hair choice, and the fact that the female
Lee Min-ho overacting, like he was extremely overacting. I don't mean to say that in any sort of negative way, but the character himself, like the main guy in Hana Yori Dango, is extreme, and like Lee Min-ho played him that way.
And Lee Min-ho, like I've watched him in other stuff, and I'm like,
he's amazing.
He's so good. And then you watch this, and I mean, I'm sure if I was a certain age then I would have been a lot more attracted to him in this. And in some ways I still am. I mean, it is the story's great. The story speaks for itself, but it's just very odd.
Well, and they also added in stuff that like is not in the manga.
Yeah.
Like she loses the ability to swim, and that was her only passion in life. And like there's a horse riding like challenge between the two main guys.
Yeah.
And like it gets weird.
It gets weird.
She becomes a medical person for a while.
Yeah.
Which sort of it's like there was a seed of a storyline in the original manga that does exist, right? Like, yeah, Ryu, who is the original kind of like second guy, he comes from a medical family, like his family has medical centers, etc. But then like she gets into that and tries to become a doctor, and like that's not really in the original manga at all. So
yeah,
it went to its own places.
Yeah, and every version does something a little different in terms of like career choices, in terms of like what they're gonna do after school, after college, after high school, whatever.
Yeah.
And everything is treated a little differently depending on what kind of cultural things they want to put in there to make it unique for their culture. Like, so the fact that like she's a swimmer in this one, it's like kind of odd, but but then that more
she wrecks her shoulder and can't swim any, like they hyped up the melodrama a lot. Yeah,
it's very melodramatic, every little thing. And that speaks to the Korean drama vibes. I mean, Korean dramas in general are very melodramatic. So that's a very unique version. And like I said before, like I think my favorite, and I think your favorite, is the 2018 version
so far.
Yeah, because it is so goofy and it maintains this level of like, we know how ridiculous this is, like we know how absurd this is, and they play up the violence a little bit, and then they go back to but we all know what's going to happen. Like it's just constantly going back and forth of being melodramatic but also a little silly and fun and almost like and comical. Like there's moments of funny, like I think the opening scene is the slow motion shot of her kicking him in the face. And it's super overdone and it's super funny, and it really just
love that moment.
Oh, it's so good.
They like I was reading through some of the comments for this Thailand version. People are like, why didn't she kick him in the face? I'm like, that's your complaint? I have reasons why she didn't kick him in the face for this one. So for the first episode, but we'll get into that when we get into the actual first episode in our next episode.
We have seen the first episode, but we're gonna just cover the kind of initial thoughts and the special.
I think what Meteor Garden does really, really well is really spend time with the characters to really give them the space that they need. And Chinese dramas in general are way longer. They give them way more space, and so they had to invent an entire storyline for one character because he doesn't have one in the original manga, like a love story, and it ends up being like the part that people skip. So obviously he didn't need one. Like that hurts a little bit for the people who are like his fans, etc. But overall, I do think that it was the cleanest and most successful version of the manga. Just it aged them up. It took things in, it kept everything thematically, but then also understood like, hey, this had to change for this time. They use like texting and other things like that. And that's something that I love seeing in these more modern versions, is like, how does technology change the story? Because we're talking about 1992. Many people were not on the internet, or it was just a very surface level, like websites or other things like that, right? Whereas this and the Thailand version have to play with the fact that the internet is something, technology is something that they all have access to, and sort of maybe it doesn't like changed the story because, hey, high status people, low status people still exist, and maybe in some ways that disparity is more real now.
Yeah,
right.
that's true.
Because even with this technology, she's still not able to be anywhere near, as affluent or anything. Technology hasn't fixed humanity's problems, and that in a way is so interesting too.
Yeah, and that's the leveling up the tech, or modernizing the tech, and kind of modernizing, like, not, that's the funny thing about the story though, right? Like, the story
they
does
have to
not
work around it a
yeah,
little bit more.
The story is like, there's always going to be bullies, and there's always going to be class divisions, and how they're telling these stories and how they're kind of going about like teasing out these little details, like that's where the gems are, like that's where, like, that's what makes it so interesting. So yeah, and we won't get into exactly what they do with the first episode, but we will get there in our next episode. So
Now
yeah,
that
let's
leads
talk
to F4 Thailand.
Yes. So one of the things that we wanted to cover that is just too much fun, because we're talking about comparisons and we're talking about kind of the little details that they change. One of the funnest things is the hair. And I think Marie Claire was the first one that mentioned this. And then I pulled the original manga kind of thing. So in the manga, the artist has little, boxes where she talks about herself and her process, and like, drawing certain characters or whatever. And one of them, she talks about how she keeps certain types of music on while they're drawing, and her assistants give her, crap about the music she listens to. And there's like all these kinds of cute little things. And in this particular one, which happens in like the second, what are they called? It's like the second volume or whatever.
Yeah.
She talks about Damuji's hairdo, and it has those little bitty, curly things. And she didn't really know what she was doing with it. And the funniest part to me is that she actually said she wanted him to have dreadlocks originally.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah. So it just says, yeah, I originally wanted him to have dreadlocks, but it turned out to be really, really difficult to get the right look. I think that would have not been recepted very well. Like, it wouldn't have been, seen very good by like an international audience for all of these male leads to have dreadlocks that came from Asian countries. So it's very interesting.
The curly hair is a good choice, I actually think, because it's unique. It's not like straight black hair.
Yeah,
that would be more commonly seen. And it at least with the 2018 Meteor Garden, the pineapple or porcupine head look, and and now I see it in the other ones, it creates this like uniqueness to his face and head. And it was specifically that it showed he was prickly.
Yes.
And it's used in such an interesting way in both the comic and in the shows. How his hair looks is a reflection of who he is on the inside.
Yeah. And there's another aspect that I really love in terms of like the intention, which is that he was always styling his hair in the morning. He was always putting a lot of time and a lot of effort to get his hair to look unlike anybody else's hair.
Yeah.
And if you go back to the, Jerry Ann version, which is, it's not, there was a Japanese version, a movie before the Meteor Garden 2001. It's not very good. And it doesn't really have good, like, fun little details. I mean, some people like it. I won't poo-poo it entirely, but it's just not very good. It's not very iconic. But even in that version, like, the hairdo was not played up. And so Jerry Ann was the first one that kind of set the tone for what the hair was supposed to be in a real life type of thing. And it does, and this is why this is important. It starts like really high, and it's really, like it is here in this GIF. But then as the show goes on, his hair kind of falls down to his shoulders and is a little bit straighter. It's more gentle. It's more like effortless.
Effortless. I love that word. Yeah.
Yeah, because it doesn't look like he's styling it every morning anymore. It just looks like he gets up and he's just happy, and his hair is
he's
just
happy in his own skin, and he is
yeah.
happy who he is. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
this is a journey, right? This is where we're going. And all of the stories have some sort of like affectation around the main character's hair. It's like his armor. It is the thing that he puts on to protect himself from the outside world. And it is wonderful when the main lead girl, our main character, says, why don't you do your hair differently? Right? Because then that sort of shatters his own worldview. It creates this cognitive dissonance where he's like, wait a second, you would like me if my hair was different? You like me if I was different? It starts to add that seed of doubt into who he feels like he is, and shatters his own worldview of himself. And it's just such a subtle, beautiful, symbolic thing that is just, it's not really highlighted in the story, but you can see it happen symbolically through the plot, right? And through what plays out. And that's why I love this story, because it's like, it's got these things, it doesn't call them out, but it's important.
Yeah. And everyone does it slightly differently, but yeah,
even
it always
when
has a
he
purpose.
Straightens his hair is hilarious.
Yeah.
Or has his hair straight.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's so good. But yeah, so that's why hair is important.
I do want to call out that that's not the only instance of this happening. That the second main lead guy who one other than Ryu in the original comic, or Ren in this version, it's Kevin, who plays the kind of affluent, comes from old money character. He ends up removing his glasses at one point, and that shows a significant character change. And hair changes show character change. Costume changes show character change. It's an outward expression of how the character is changing physically on the outside to match their internals. It's beautiful when they do it.
Absolutely. It happens to the female lead in almost every version as well. As she becomes more confident, she tends to wear more grown-up clothing, or come out of her school uniform and actually wearing expressive clothing. So that'll be interesting to see with this version as well, because it is a school setting. She does have a school uniform, so we shall see.
What have you thought of Bright's hair in any of the pre stuff as time? It's not super curly. It's just like kind of wavy.
Yeah, I feel like I haven't quite put my finger on it yet, but when I was watching it, I was thinking about just kind of how it looks a little angry. Like it looks like
he's bristly. Yeah,
he's bristly. It's like, it's not quite like prickly like Daming in Meteor Garden, but it's like he woke up and he took a shower and he just like shook his head really fast, and that's it. Even though that there's more styling that goes into this, it doesn't have quite the effect that the others have. So I'm really interested to see if it changes.
It feels like everyone else is very extreme on the hair game. Whereas it feels almost purposefully like I'm trying to make it just angry. It's a really interesting choice. I'm really into it.
Yeah, same. Okay, let's talk about, this is just something quickly I wanted to mention. So in Thailand and in a lot of Southeast Asian countries, they use a lot of nicknames. And this is something I learned specifically with this version, is that the reason why they have all these kind of English sounding names is because they actually refer to each other as to these nicknames. So in Thailand, they have a Chu Ling, which is their real name. And then they have a Chu Lin, which is their nickname. And Chu Lin is actually directly translated as play name. So and it has something to do with luck. So it's typically like family members give them this nickname, and they use that regularly every day. Like it's not, no one uses their legal names or their real names, which are typically longer, and more difficult to pronounce. So they all use these kind of nicknames. And this chart, which I think it was in a magazine somewhere, was breaking down the relationships and shows that their names and
they're like even public facing names are also nicknames.
Exactly.
Which is also interesting. Like Two and Bright are their
Exactly.
public facing names, but those are still nicknames.
Right.
And it's just so common. And like Win and Bright were in a bunch of previous dramas together in a boy love drama. And so those are the main main actors that are coming back who have like a fair amount of fandom around them. But like Ren and MJ and Gorya, they're all new.
Yeah, they're
So
new.
it's
Yeah.
like, whoa.
Yeah. And I think even I came across some things with Milk. Her name that's her public facing name, her nickname.
Yeah.
I thought that
Lita,
was a cute one. So yeah, it's so interesting. And it helps. Oh God, it helps us so much because it took me forever to learn how to pronounce like Damiji. And I don't think I'm
or Daming
Si or Daming Si, like
and Sheng
Shensai. Yeah, like it's
like, and we're working on it.
Thank God for Thailand.
A bunch of North American people trying to like pronounce names badly on this show would be bad, but they give us really easily internationally like easy pronounceable names.
Exactly.
And thank you, creators. I think they also realized like not because some of the nicknames are, you know, what they are, right? They're just they are still harder to pronounce, but I think for all the mains, they really, really tried to get nicknames that were easy for us English speakers to pronounce.
Oh,
like
absolutely.
They were nice.
Yeah, the in the next slide, actually, we're talking about
not that
Gorya.
That's a requirement. I would have tried, but oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, no, the fact MJ, like that's super easy. So the only one that's actually more difficult to pronounce is Gorya, and it took me forever to kind of get like, you know, Gorya? It's not Gorya, it's Gorya, like
Gorya,
which is it's very
up. Okay.
It's not natural for us to do that. But the reason why hers is like the only one that's like difficult to pronounce.
Oh yeah,
is because
of the symbolic meaning.
The meaning,
yeah,
which I think you wanted to talk about because you found it on the you found the translation.
Oh yeah, of course. So
and Two is her, obviously I put this up there as well because Two is her public facing nickname, but Gorya is the name is her name in the drama. So
yeah, so in Hana Yori Dango and in all of the versions of this story as it plays out, the character, the main female lead, has this stick-to-itiveness, this stubbornness, and it is either described as you're a weed or grass that grows anywhere. Like think of the idea of a character that can kind of survive wherever she is, and that's the idea. That is the embodiment of the main female lead in this story. And they literally they took that and they literally translated it into her nickname, Clump of Grass. Right? Like Shang Shai in the Meteor Garden, Chinese 2018 version, calls herself a weed. Right?
She's strong.
She's strong and she can survive anywhere.
But she's also on the bottom and she's also below people's feet.
Yes. And Tsukeshi, the original like manga character, means weed. So like it is a thematic element and it's symbolically important to the heart of the story. And they saw that and then we're like, you know what? Let's run with that more. And we'll get into that when we actually get into the, you know, into the story and see that they're actually just playing with that, which is glorious. Thank you, creators, for being like, hey, we're going to tell this story on the base level, but then you know what? We're going to add all of this symbolism and importance and metaphor on top of that. And it's spot on. They get it. They get it. This makes me excited. And that's why I'm like, Meteor Garden 2018 is my favorite version of this story to date, because this one could win.
Yeah.
Like
I think so
it's
too.
Got the stuff.
It's getting really exciting, honestly. The amount of stuff they're just like on the nose about, but also just like it's very creatively done is making me super happy. So another big part of Gorya as kind of the female lead that we have seen throughout all the different versions that's really important is that she is a self-insert character in a is it shoujo manga, which is and typically they are reverse harems where it's one girl and a bunch of guys. Typically these are guys who adore her, but in this story there's just these kind of two guys that adore her at different kind of times, and so it's a very,
it ends up being more of a supportive harem where they all sort of support the main couple in a variety of ways. And the guys themselves have their own stories.
Which is, it's very unique for this for this kind of self-insert female, you know, teenager fantasy where you have a lot of guys, but like it's interesting not because they adore her, it's interesting because they are unique characters, they complete each other, and like I said, they support each other, so it's very interesting. But
and she has female friends of her own. I think that's also unique in reverse harem stories.
Absolutely.
Sometimes like the guys like fill that space, but she has family, she has a best friend, she has friends she makes at school, like she's not alone. I think that's also like a really important difference in this story.
She's not alone, and the fact she, you know, her family typically plays a pretty big role in every version, whether or not she has a sibling. That's always kind of a different thing. And then also like it's a Cinderella story, right? So it's taking a rags to riches type of thing, but in a unique way. It is not immediate. It's not like she's swept off her feet, she falls in love, she marries the prince, she's now a princess.
She almost fights him the whole way.
She is a reluctant Cinderella.
Princess.
She does not want to, and we'll get into that with the first episode too, because there's something really unique they do with this version. But in the previous version so far, she has no want to become this rich wife. Like why would she care about that, you know? And that's very unique because she's wanting to find her own way in the world, and it's not until she actually does that, and that's probably in most of the versions, that's when things kind of wrap up and they get married and all of that. So I like that. That part of it is interesting to me because we get our happily ever after, we get our love story, but they both have to fight for that.
Exactly.
So,
and I think that's something that we'll get into. Oh, here. Excellent. Yes. this is where we're going to get into it. Yeah.
So, so the big question that we wanted to ask, which we've kind of glazed over a little bit here and there so far, is why is the story being told over and over again? Why does everybody want to do a version every time it pops up? And we'll cover the special in a minute too, in a little bit more depth. But one of the things that happened in the special was that the director said, you know, I was approached to do this because they had the rights, and he thought, why would I do this? Why would I make this kind of story? And he went and he did his homework. He read the manga and he came back and he was like, you know, everybody of every age must have a story about this. And it was to me, that's like, oh, he got it. Like he gets it. Yeah. It's perfect, especially as a guy saying like, hey, like we all need this story. Cause it's not just about the female lead. It's not just about the male lead. It's about both of them. And it's about the F4. It's about all of them. The F5, it basically becomes, but yeah,
they adopt her. I think that's also like, you know, like they become a different sort of family.
It's like found family type of thing. Yeah.
I do think that it's important that both his co-director and all the screenwriters are women. So
yes,
it does come with that sort of lens too. Like it's not like you know, every time this story is done or redone, like women care and they want to be part of it, right? Like because it means something to many women. And I do think that like if this were to be on TV in North America, which it has, there was an unofficial version, it's going to be done bad because like there's so much femme gaze in this story and it's problematic in all the ways that it is problematic. But yet it still does something because it's doing something fundamental and psychological. And if you want to talk through some of these aspects.
Oh yeah. So sure. Basically, one of the biggest things for me, like when I was getting into these stories, was looking at love stories a little differently, right? Like taking the time to tease out what they meant for the young women who were thrown into this story, thrown into this conflict, and what would eventually end up in a love story and in a most of the time like a marriage, a partnership. A lot of people like to say like these are themes that we need to grow past as a society, or it's misogynistic or whatever. And that just I never understood that line of thinking, because I think it's beautiful to love. And so looking at specifically the Hana Yori Dango structure, the story structure, and these different versions, I kind of mapped my own villainous love or redeemed, which is the storyline just from the female lead perspective, because it's a little different for the male because he has more of a traditional hero's journey.
Absolutely.
Which is more of a cycle, but for the woman, she's constantly falling, tumbling more into his world and more into conflict. Every time there's a conflict, she thinks,
suffers for it.
Yeah, she suffers. And then she gets out of it and she's like, okay, I'm stronger than I thought I was. And then she tumbles into another conflict. And it's just over and over again until certain characters make their self known. Certain characters support her that she didn't even know were there, and help her understand that she is powerful. She has gone through all of this and she can overcome anything. And that's when she kind of falls in love with the male lead, because now she's understood herself better.
Yeah.
But it takes her to go through all of that to actually understand her own feelings and her own wants, and to understand like she's worthy of his love, and to see that it's something to be, worthy of. So,
and that he is worthy of her too. I think that's also something that's really interesting. And this is something I've been thinking a lot about since speaking with my good friend Katie Pohat Dameron on Twitter about the concept of convergence and divergence, and how these moments by which a dyad or a sort of divine pair end up coming together to head towards the ultimate version, which is a relationship, right? And they themselves, as they're going through their trials, will either, as they reach a conflict point, decide to converge or diverge, and that affects the story around them. And that it is sort of so beautiful. And this is all Katie's brain, so I want to shout it out to her and say you're brilliant, because we were talking about something completely unrelated to this, which is Cobra Kai. But it still follows the same structure, because it's about whether these two people, and in that case it's Johnny and Danny, are converging together, becoming a pair, becoming partners, and working together and trusting each other, or are they diverging? Is there something that ends up causing problems and they're going into opposite directions and it causes more problems? And then as they converge again, it creates different outcomes, whether they are working together or are they misunderstanding each other.
I love that visual. I think it's like very, very interesting. And the next time I rewatch kind of the episode, I think I'm going to think about that more, because it's playing with my brain.
It is now going to be part of my repertoire of things that I analyze in media.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask Katie to do an actual analysis on it, because it is fundamental to how these, especially when you have sort of a divine pair or a pair that is in a trial gamut, like they're going through trials to successively learn, come together, etc. There's a way you can do it that even though they separate, it's still satisfying because of what they learn and turn to converge later.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful framework by which to start to think about these things.
I love that. And this goes all the way back to, like, when we talk about these stories, we're talking about like classically Beauty and the Beast, Phantom of the Opera. You know, these are stories that are about two people that start out not compatible, but fall in love through trials and fall in love through the constant, like you're talking about, like coming together and falling apart and coming together and falling apart. And it's addicting because it's all conflict.
Or Pride and Prejudice. You want to see if they're really going to make it work this time, or how they're going to make it work this time. And why is Pride and Prejudice redone over and over and over? Mm-hmm. Same concept, high status, low status, opposites, mm-hmm. and how they end up finding a third path through their separate indifferences. And it's through experiencing each other's worlds. It's through being there for each other or not being there for each other and finding out what that meant. Like, it is wonderful to experience these as the audience watching these stories play out. They're very psychologically satisfying to see the trials equate to something fundamental and to transcend.
Absolutely. And and transcendence is a huge part of it.
Beyond duality, choosing oneness, choosing to be together is the transcendent outcome that we want, right?
Exactly. Yeah. We had, let's see here. Do we want to talk a little bit more about iterative storytelling or baby villains and how he's baby?
Yeah, I do. So a lot of people don't like the main lead when they approach this story. No, I'm serious. Like, literally, I've seen people who are like, I tried watching Meteor Garden or I tried watching Boys Over Flowers and I hate them and I can't get into it.
Yeah.
Right. They're literally like, ugh.
Like,
and you know what? We longtime scarred Raylos know what that's like. Right? This is Kylo Ren.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
This archetype of being an irredeemable child.
Yeah.
It turns some people just right around and they're like, nope, I'm noping out. I can't handle your child this way, because they feel like the story is maybe reinforcing the idea like, I can fix him, but that's really not what the story is doing.
No, not at all.
It's about the idea that when you go through trauma or you go through trials or you go through challenging conflict or situations together, you seek to understand the other person that's going through that with you, and you start to evolve with them.
Yeah. It is hard for some people to understand that this is not just about her and it's not just about him. It's about both of them, and their stories are interacting together and influencing each other. And she's not changing him, even though her presence is influencing him to change. The opposite is happening as well. His presence in her life is influencing her to change. So because you have kind of this, it's a weird equality to talk about, because obviously there are still certain power dynamics at play. Like, he is of a higher class, and
but she's stronger than him. I think that's really important to say. Like, she's emotionally and mentally stronger than him.
Yes.
She wins her way. Yes. And this ties to this concept of like him starting out as a monster. He has power because he can't control all of the power that he has. It ends up kind of going everywhere and messing other people up.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And there's like this notion in kind of our fandoms, with like Kylo Ren and the Beast and like whoever you want to classify as like these romantic characters that start out.
Peter the Terrible from The Great.
There you go. Yes. And they're monsters. They're absolutely monsters, but they're also incredibly immature. Yeah. So they're baby monsters, and you know where they're going. You know that they're going to be redeemed, right? That's a big part of this. They're usually
adolescent narrative too, right? They need to grow up and become men and take responsibility for themselves and understand their responsibility to their society and themselves and others.
Yeah.
And through that is because they have learned to love another other than themselves.
And that was
just straight that story.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah. It's awesome. And that's why it's so much fun, because you know where this is going. You know where this is going to end up. It's so much fun to just embrace the monster, right?
Yeah.
Just like enjoy it, because you know these two are going to end up together. You know that his monstrosity is encouraging her to be stronger and is pushing her to understand herself in ways that she would have never understood unless she had met him. And that's fun. Like, it's a fantasy. It's fun. That's why I'm all for the ride every single time.
I'm also obsessed with these stories because one thing that you have to understand, although he tames, it's not that he tames and doesn't become a monster. I think that's also important. He still has all of the power that he had before, but instead of being this sort of monster that's loose on the village, in this archetype, he becomes the monster, but her monster.
Yeah.
And they're playing into that already, and I'm so excited to see it.
Yeah.
And like, we see this in other versions. We see Beauty and the Beast, you know, especially like the modern or the live action version that they did. Like, she's like, oh, you know, maybe you could still be a monster a little bit. And he's like, yeah, I still am a monster. Like
keep the facial hair.
Yeah, keep the facial hair. Like they still want that aspect of what they fell for, which is the darkness, the shadow, the thing that you're understanding about the darkness of yourself in that other person. And you learn to love the darkness in yourself through that other person. It's beautiful. Why would we ever not love this story? Because it's heightened through the psychology of telling the story. It's fantasy. It's fiction. We can play in fiction.
It's an extreme. And that's the point. Yeah. So,
okay. Love triangles.
Love triangles.
Some people don't like love triangles. But there is one, so we'll just like get it out there in the open.
Yes. So the love triangle, which is, it's like, I mean, people would still classify this as a triangle, even though there's like two triangle-ish things next to each other, which is what I tried to kind of show here.
No, this was beautiful. This is a beautiful.
Thanks. It took me forever to figure it out. Took me forever. So we have our male lead, Time, and of course we know he's going to be in love with our female lead, Gorya, and she is falling for Ren. And then Ren is obviously in love with, I think her name is Mira.
Yeah.
So the funny way it plays out is that this love triangle doesn't come back on itself like some of them do. But that's the funny part, is the way that it comes back, like how it reverses. Right?
Yes.
So you wanted to talk about that, like the power of a triangle.
Yeah. So one of the, and I've talked a lot about this on the Star Wars side, because from a family relationship theory perspective, relationships will always have three sides. You might think that you're married and you've only got one significant other, but then you realize you actually have a best friend that helps stabilize your relationship with the other person. So you have a best friend who supports you and makes sure that relationship system is actually stable. And sometimes those relationships, the triangles, are unhealthy situations where they're only stable because they're toxic, and sometimes they're stable because they're supportive. And again, triangles are the strongest geometric shape.
So it's funny. So the way I did this is perfect, because like, so what happens is that our Ren character, Ren
up
is
at the top.
is supportive of these two, of Time and Gorya.
Gorya. Yeah.
And then Mira and Ren, are supported by Gorya.
Yeah. And so she is friends with Mira, and also realizes that what's best for Ren is that he loves Mira. So it never gets in the way of that relationship and allows it to play out the way it needs to. And then eventually when Gorya starts to reciprocate with Time, although Ren in many of the versions develops feelings for Gorya, he never gets in the way of that relationship because he knows that that's what's best for them.
Yeah.
And it is fascinating to see these things play out when you actually analyze the media and you see the triangles of the relationships. But this was perfect. So I loved your visual.
I think it came together well.
Yeah.
Cool. One of the things that we did not get to mention was the kind of the surreal aspects. We kind of touched on it a little bit with talking about the extremities of the story and how we're pushing these themes to an extreme because it's a fantasy and because it gets things across that otherwise would not have gotten across. So I think, to me, what's interesting is that every director and every version pulls in some surreal aspects. Like for this one, for F4 Thailand, we're seeing that stadium, right? Yeah. It's so fantastical and it's so surreal, and it's not that it's not believable, but watching it, you're like, okay, this would never happen, but I am here for this. Like,
yes.
It looks
and it
cool.
has a pool of water that they walk on, and it becomes like this like cleansing thing in the weird twisted version. We'll get into that in episode 1, but
yes,
like there's always an aspect of fantastical, even if it's, hey, this could happen, this is literally happening on screen, but there's an aspect of fantastical that's built into these stories because it needs to be heightened to resonate with us psychologically.
Yeah. If you read the manga, it's not that extreme, like in terms of the visual that it provides, because it's pretty old. Like, it came out like 1992, blah. But if you try to translate that at all into a cinematic experience, then all of a sudden you have all this stuff to play with. Like, where does this occur? And how does this occur? And these things happen because the manga outlines that it happens, but like, how does it happen? You have so much you can play around with. And that's what's so much fun. Like the Meteor Garden, they had a beautiful backdrop because they filmed it in that college setting on a campus there in China. And they had that big pool of water, the shallow water where he threw the necklace. And it's like one of my favorite shots ever in television is when she walks out to the water to try to find the necklace. Yeah. It's beautiful. And I'm like, as soon as I saw the stadium filled with water, I was like, oh, interesting. Yeah. It kind of called back to it, like in a way, without actually calling back to it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And there's things like that I'm like, oh, is that going to be a Chekhov's gun in a way? Yeah. Like, is that going to come back? Is that going to be a thing or a theme or a symbol that we're going to be paying attention to? And they're already laying the groundwork for some fun stuff in episode 1. And so it's just joy to be like, I know where this story is going and I'm here for it.
Absolutely. Cool. Okay, so let's talk about the special. I have some screen grabs here because one of the big things they talked about after kind of introducing us to the director and our leads were, obviously this show is called F4 Thailand, which is the first one that is focusing solely on F4, right? As like the point of the story, which is new. So
because either they focus on Boys Over Flowers, which is sort of I should probably explain it. The original manga, Dango is flower candy, and the main lead and her best friend work in a flower candy shop basically,
Right.
like, so a candy shop. And it's a play on that idea because the boys themselves are called flowers, which is sort of like, if you were to translate that, sort of metrosexuals, I guess,
Yeah.
like
The
they're just
flower
like
for,
the
yeah.
flower for, they're all just like this unique version of a man in society, who have kind of, they look beautiful, but they're actually thorny. That's kind of the
Mhm.
idea. And so that's the metaphor that is being told in the Boys Over Flowers name,
Mhm.
which is used. The Taiwan or Taiwanese version and the Chinese
Chinese,
version
yeah.
sort of play it differently, which is to say there's a meteor garden, and although she can't go to the heavens where they are, they're going to live in this place that is in between. And
Yeah.
it's sort of a beautiful, wonderful metaphor for where they end up going with the story in both versions. This is different,
Mhm.
but it doesn't mean that they don't understand actually both of those messages and have sort of added them into the story itself.
Oh, yes, and we know that they have. It's very cool. It's very cool. I was always kind of like on the fence about like what Meteor Garden was and what it meant. And then after watching this version, I'm like, oh,
Oh,
I understand something I did not understand before, which that's all a part of this iterative storytelling.
it
Every
helps
time
you
you,
understand the story more the more versions you watch, because each one picks up different stuff. Amazing, hey?
oh, it's so cool. It's so cool. So yeah, so this the second part of the special, they focus on the four guys, and I just wanted to cover this quickly because it's interesting what they're doing with them. So you have Kevin, we obviously have Time the Leader, MJ, and then Ren. And in every version, I think Kevin and MJ, their counterparts have always been very different, but they have two very, like, they have something like one trait at least that kind of runs the same throughout, which is that Kevin is always the player, and
Yeah.
he's always the one who I can't remember. Is he the one that
Ends
I
up with
always?
the second female lead.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
he's the cool. Yeah, he's cooler and
He's cooler and has commitment issues.
yes,
MJ traditionally only dates women that are significantly older than
older.
him.
Yes,
And he's a gangster, and in some versions he's not a gangster. It's interesting how they choose to either play that up or not. But he's always just
yeah.
really hot and there to support everybody.
And that's something that the director mentioned. Like he called it out, and he was
He's like,
like,
he doesn't really have much of a story, so we just made him really hot, so he takes up space and everybody notices him and he gets enough play that way. I'm like, okay, you know what you're doing, fine.
"Oh yeah." He added that he was even a scene stealer, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, I'm down for it." Like I
He's
already
so
thought he was.
hot. The
He's so
actor
hot.
is so hot. The
And
long hair.
he's so sweet and precious too. Like
I
in the
know.
special,
I'm
he
like
was,
your baby.
yes, he was so sweet. Every time he moves, like he just like moves his head, like, oh my god, I was completely blown away just by the tiniest little things that he did, and everything that he said. I was like hooked on his words. Like he's got a charisma that is pretty incredible, I would say. And I'm excited to see exactly what they do with his character, because if he's like this mafia guy who rides a motorcycle, like,
Yeah.
I'm down for this. So yeah, Kevin, they changed, or they, okay, so typically, I probably should mention Ren first, because Ren typically plays the violin,
Yeah.
and that was in the manga, and that's in almost every version, I think.
Almost piano and violin. He's musician, and
Yeah,
they did not do that this time. He's an artist
he's an
and
artist,
he
which is
draws.
brilliant
Yeah.
because it leads to those perfect plot points of him drawing her. I mean, it's
Yeah.
absolutely,
It's gonna be there. That's a
it's
Chekhov's gun right there. He draws her in the first episode. Not
yeah.
spoilers, but yeah.
And I
Yeah.
would, I already called it, like when I watched the special, I was like, oh, he's gonna draw her, because of
Yeah.
course he is. So that's absolutely brilliant and super spot on, and makes him a far less selfish of an artist, right? Because he always played his violin for himself and alone, right?
Right.
And then whenever she would come along, he'd be like, you're kind of interrupting my privacy. But now it's like he's quietly observing from the sidelines, and he's always watching, and he's taking in these memories and then drawing them, and that's super sexy.
It was a very good choice to change it up. I also think that like sometimes the Ren character can come off as unfeeling.
Yes.
That's not the character. He's unemotive.
Yes.
That's the difference. He is feeling, he sees, he just can't emote. And so they're probably going to use the drawing aspect of it to show how he feels and emotes. And that's beautiful.
Yes. Whereas
they only show the one violin song where he plays it specifically for her, but that takes a really long time. They could use it more often to communicate how he's feeling with this.
100%. It's going to be a really sexy buildup, I think.
Yeah.
Personally. It's just great because I'm not a fan of that character from other versions. Like I've never really, it's weird. Like even with
I am already such a fan of this actor and his character.
I am 100% loving him. And I'm not like, I can't put my finger on any one aspect, but you know, the fact that he's like a newer actor and he is like green and he's like learning, and I'm just like, oh my God, you're precious. You're so precious. So yeah, I'm down for this. Kevin does flower.
They're called flower garlands.
Garlands. Yes, he does flower garlands. And in the Chinese version, he was a big tea expert. Yes. So that was interesting.
He was a tea expert in all of the versions.
Really?
Yes, he has been a tea expert in every single version except for this one. So they've changed the and again, I think this maybe plays a little bit into the Thailand change, right? Because the flower garlands themselves are a very Thai, like an old school thing. So when you sometimes when you go to somebody's house, they'll be like, here, have a flower garland, very like Hawaiian-ish for a North American audience who can kind of understand that. And they're called fong maile. And it's a very, very Thailand thing. And why changing the place that the girls work at to a flower store is so significant is because that's how Kevin and the second main lead female, her best friend, so the main lead female's Gorya, her kanging I apologize, I haven't heard it pronounced yet. They fall in love over their shared interest in things, and she starts to explore his interests in trying to understand him more, and she's already into flowers, whereas in previous versions it was candy and tea, and then tea and tea, and like now it's flowers and flowers. I love it. It was so smart. They understood what this thing was supposed to do, but it was sort of based in the other versions.
Everything it's purposeful. It's like they say, because like the Chinese version, it was like, oh, we'll just have her work in a tea shop and we'll have him come over and they talk about tea. Like it kind of just lent itself to having those moments because those were moments that were already in the story. But this is giving it so much more reason, like so much more purpose. I really, really like that because you can see the puzzle pieces falling into place before they've happened. And then not just because you know the story. I mean, like you said, this is like Chekhov's gun type of things.
Yes.
So,
and I do want to talk about time because they're brilliant. Like the special is so good. And I hope you link to it in the liner notes, Ty.
Yes. Yeah. I'll make it easy for people to find. Let's keep it here for now.
Time has 4 aspects to his personality, like 4 different times. They actually talked about it, and they would talk about the percentage of each time. And there's angry time, there's child time, there's sweet time, and then there's smitten time, and I'm obsessed.
Oh yeah.
I'm obsessed with this because like literally you can see him change you know, in different moments, and it's going to be so good. We should probably do a chart.
That's a good idea.
As we go.
Yeah.
Like angry child, sweet spitting and seeing the percentages that make up him, because like you can see it as he's developing in different scenes that we've just seen in the special.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, and they really, what I appreciate and is so thoughtful that they showed in the special is that they care enough to have thought hard about all of this, and they make purposeful choices that are not not cheesy, not over the top, but tie into what they're trying to say.
Yeah, they're taking very special care with him, and it's almost like when you look at the director talk to Bright about time, you see that the director is kind of like, this is my baby, like this is my child, this is me when I was a kid, this is me. Like he's caring for the character, like he knows the character, and he wants to treat the evolution of the character with a lot of care, and that's super cool. Like I don't think we've seen this type of kind of background behind the scenes stuff that's been so easily available for English speakers. Like I know that they had behind the scenes stuff for previous versions, but it was not translated. It wasn't available.
Yeah, this production knew going in that they were going to have a large international audience. They also typically Thailand dramas are translated, subbed right away so that they can be popular in the Philippines and be picked up. And so this is actually just part of the culture to pick them up and do it this way, because they know they need to market to at least Southeast Asia international markets.
Right. And they did talk about that in the special in terms of like kind of the pressure. And the director said that he was seeing and communicating with international fans. I thought that was really interesting, because he was like, he knows that immediately upon that episode release, like there are people all over the world that are going to watch this. And so he's making choices thinking about that. Like that's really weird. And it doesn't feel, westernized, of course, because that's not how he approached it. He just approached it knowing that people care about the story.
Yeah.
And he's treating it with such care. He's
treating it with love and care, which is all we want from a director.
Exactly. Okay, so the theme song is Who Am I, right? And this is perfect for what we were just talking about. The Who Am I, the lyrics, if you go watch the music video, and it starts with him. There's a black rose that is kind of there in the subway car with him, and they're on a journey. Yes, he's on a journey, and everybody's in different cars on the train, and he finds her, and she's like looking at a picture of a red rose. So I have a theory about this, by the way, but I'm not going to go into it until we go into the first episode. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, so they run through the cars together, and like there's that whole idea of it's left very open-ended in terms of like the symbolism and the meaning, but the song itself is hitting the same themes of what they were talking about in the special, which is that time is on a journey to figure out who he is. And so is Gorya. But his journey is very special because he's going to be so different after this. He's just going to, he's going to be a very different person, seemingly, like on the outside, and how we're going to perceive him will be different. So I love that. I think that's a beautiful song.
And typically the other versions of like Meteor Garden and Boys Over Flowers had a lot more singing songs, like songs with the lyrics during the actual show. This had a lot of background music. Sometimes it was playful, sometimes it was quirky, sometimes it was very serious, but it was all just instrumental, which I also is a significant difference for me in this version.
Yeah, there's I think the Japanese version was pretty similar. Like Japanese version doesn't have a lot of
all
LST.
Instrumental.
Yeah, so that was interesting. The visuals I snapped from the special at the very end were just the when he said they had to do an exercise, the two leads, in which they fought each other, and they like had to act like they hated each other, and then they had to go from that to hugging each other.
Oh my god,
and
he said smart.
He did that before casting them, like before final casting, because he had to make sure that they had something, because he said that if they didn't have something, then the show wouldn't be anything. Like they had to have the chemistry when they fought and when they loved, because that's what the show is writing on. So I just thought that was really precious. Yeah, so
It was perfect.
it was great. Yeah. So yeah, I'll link to the specials, the special episodes, because they do come in parts. So
and the song,
and the music video.
Who Am I?
Yeah, and the liner notes. Yeah, Who Am I? So
yeah,
so that
so
was
good.
episode 0, I guess.
Yes.
And
stay tuned for our episode 1 deep dive, which will be coming out after this, of course.
Yes.
Which we will dig into every episode as a unique episode, even if we're only releasing them every week or every 2 weeks, but you'll get them.
Yeah, I'll figure out. I'm going to solidify the schedule soon, and I will put that out there. And let us, MC, let them know where they can find you.
Oh, sure. I'm Marie Claire Gould, and I host What the Force podcast. So that deals with Star Wars. I also have a sister channel and podcast called What the Fiction. And you can kind of search anywhere on the internet for those things, or whattheforce.ca. If you're looking to follow me on Twitter, it's Marie C. Gould as my personal Twitter, or WT Force Show for What the Force, or WT Force Media for What the Fiction.
Yep. Awesome. And you can find me obviously here on my channel. Please subscribe and like this if you enjoyed it, and look out for our future episodes. You can also follow me on Twitter at wit_FOLLY, at wit_folly, or you can also find me on my personal Twitter account, which is at black_TYM. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Cheers.